The year 1805 dawned with a palpable tension across Europe, a continent held in the thrall of Napoleon Bonaparte's seemingly unstoppable ambition. Napoleon, now Emperor of the French, cast a long shadow from Paris, his eyes fixed firmly on his most stubborn adversary, Great Britain. The island nation, a fortress of commerce and naval might, remained the single greatest obstacle to his total domination of the continent. His grand design, the Armée d'Angleterre, was more than a mere threat. It was a meticulously prepared invasion force gathered along the French coast. Thousands of troops drilled relentlessly, their purpose clear and their morale high, waiting for the signal to cross the narrow strait. But for this invasion to succeed, one critical element was required: control of the English Channel, even if only for a few days. This task fell to his navy, a combined fleet of French and Spanish warships, formidable in number but plagued by internal issues. Commanding this fleet was Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve, a capable but cautious officer haunted by a previous defeat at the Battle of the Nile. Villeneuve was acutely aware of the British Royal Navy's superior training, gunnery, and seamanship. Standing against him was a figure of almost mythical status in Britain, Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson. Nelson was the embodiment of the Royal Navy's aggressive spirit, a brilliant and audacious tactician beloved by his men. His very name was a symbol of hope for the British people and a source of dread for their enemies. Napoleon's intricate plan involved Villeneuve's fleet breaking out of the British blockade of Toulon. They were to sail to the West Indies, luring Nelson's pursuing fleet far across the Atlantic. The French would then double back, join with other Spanish and French squadrons, and sweep into the English Channel. This grand feint was designed to leave the Channel undefended for the critical window needed for the invasion. In early 1805, the plan was set in motion, and Villeneuve slipped past Nelson's blockade during a storm. Nelson, upon discovering the French had escaped, was initially unsure of their destination. When their heading for the Caribbean was confirmed, he began a relentless pursuit across the ocean. The chase was a grueling test of endurance for both fleets, a strategic cat-and-mouse game played out over thousands of miles of open water. Villeneuve reached the West Indies, but the rendezvous with other Allied squadrons was only partially successful. Panicked by the news of Nelson's unexpectedly swift arrival in the region, Villeneuve decided to abandon the plan and sail back to Europe. His return journey was intercepted off Cape Finisterre by another British squadron, resulting in an indecisive but damaging battle. Instead of pressing on to the north as Napoleon had commanded, the demoralized Villeneuve sought refuge in the Spanish port of Cadiz. There, the combined Franco-Spanish fleet found itself trapped, bottled up by the newly arrived British fleet under Nelson's command. The strategic situation had shifted dramatically. The hunter had become the jailer. For weeks, Nelson maintained a loose blockade, keeping his main force over the horizon to tempt Villeneuve out. Inside Cadiz, the mood was grim, with supplies dwindling and tensions rising between the French and Spanish crews. Villeneuve received word that Napoleon, furious at the failure of his invasion plan, was dispatching a replacement to relieve him of command. Spurred into action by this final indignity, Villeneuve made the fateful decision to break out of Cadiz and sail for the Mediterranean. On October 19th, the combined fleet began to slowly file out of the harbor. British frigates, the eyes of Nelson's fleet, observed the maneuver and raced to signal the news. Nelson, aboard his flagship HMS Victory, had been preparing for this moment for months. He had used the time to drill his captains and articulate his revolutionary battle plan. He rejected the traditional tactic of forming a single line of battle parallel to the enemy. This method, he argued, was too slow and often led to indecisive engagements where the enemy could escape. Nelson's plan which he called the Nelson touch, was one of audacious, concentrated force. He would divide his smaller fleet into two columns and drive them perpendicularly through the enemy's line. One column, led by his second-in-command, Admiral Collingwood, would smash through the rear of the Allied fleet. The other column, led by Nelson himself in the Victory, would strike the center, near the enemy commander. This would shatter the enemy's formation, creating a chaotic, close-quarters melee. In such a fight, Nelson was confident that the superior gunnery and seamanship of his crews would be decisive. It was a high-risk strategy, as the lead ships would endure concentrated fire during their slow approach. But it promised not just a victory, but the total annihilation of the enemy fleet. The morning of October 21st, 1805, broke with light winds and a gentle swell off Cape Trafalgar. The combined Franco-Spanish fleet, numbering 33 ships of the line, was a formidable sight. They formed a sprawling, somewhat disorganized crescent, stretching for miles across the water. Bearing down on them were Nelson's 27 ships, organized into two disciplined columns. Aboard the British ships, the mood was one of quiet determination as they cleared the decks for action. Sand was scattered on the decks to soak up the inevitable blood. Nelson, dressed in his full admiral's uniform, paced the quarterdeck of the Victory. His decorations glittered in the morning sun, making him a conspicuous target. He was advised to cover them, but he refused, believing his presence would inspire his men. As the fleets closed, Nelson ordered his signal officer to hoist a message to the fleet. It was a message that would become immortalized in British history. Flag by flag, the signal spelled out, "England expects that every man will do his duty." A great cheer went up from the crews as the message was relayed from ship to ship. The approach seemed to take an eternity, the British ships sailing slowly into the cannon sights of the enemy. The combined fleet held its fire, waiting for the lead British ships to come into range. Admiral Collingwood's ship, the AMS Royal Sovereign, was the first to reach the enemy line. It endured the combined fire of several ships before unleashing a devastating broadside. Battle had begun in earnest. Soon after, Nelson's own column pierced the center of the Allied formation. AMS Victory, a one-hard-gun, first-rate ship of the line, became locked in a deadly duel with the French flagship Bucentaure and the mighty Redoutable. The sea became a hellish cauldron of smoke, fire, and noise. The thunder of over 2,000 cannons was a continuous, deafening roar. Thick, acrid smoke choked the air, obscuring vision and turning day into a murky twilight. Splinters of wood, as deadly as shrapnel, filled the air with every cannonball strike. The decks ran with the blood of the wounded and the dying. Amidst the carnage, Nelson remained a calm and commanding presence on the Victory's quarterdeck. He issued orders with clarity, his strategic mind seeing patterns in the chaos. Smaller French ship Redoutable, captained by the tenacious Jean-Jacques Lucas, closed in on the Victory. Lucas had trained his crew extensively in marksmanship and boarding actions. French sharpshooters, positioned in the rigging of the Redoutable, fired down onto the exposed deck of the British flagship. At around 1:15 in the afternoon, a musket ball fired from above found its mark. Nelson collapsed on the deck, shot through the shoulder and lung, the bullet lodging in his spine. He was carried below to the cockpit, the dark, cramped space serving as the surgeon's station. As he lay dying, he continued to ask for reports from the battle raging above. He knew instantly that the wound was mortal, but his thoughts remained with his fleet and his duty. On deck, the battle continued with unabated fury, driven by the vengeance of the Victory's crew. The Redoubtable was battered into submission, its decks a scene of horrific slaughter. Across the battle line, the superior British gunnery was proving decisive. One by one, French and Spanish ships were dismasted, crippled, or forced to surrender. The Spanish ship Santísima Trinidad, the largest warship in the world at the time, was overwhelmed and captured. Villeneuve's flagship, the Bucentaur, was pounded into a wreck, and the admiral himself was taken prisoner. By late afternoon, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The combined fleet had been utterly shattered. Down below, Nelson received the news that a great and complete victory had been won. His task was complete, his duty fulfilled. His last words, whispered to his chaplain, were, "Thank God I have done my duty." Horatio Nelson, the savior of Britain, died as the echoes of his greatest triumph faded. The battle resulted in a victory more complete than even Nelson could have hoped for. Not a single British ship was lost, though many were heavily damaged. In contrast, the Franco-Spanish fleet was annihilated, losing 22 of their 33 ships. The human cost was immense, with thousands of French and Spanish sailors killed, wounded, or captured. The victory was, however, immediately threatened by a new enemy: the weather. A severe gale blew up in the aftermath of the battle, endangering both the victors and their captured prizes. Many of the captured ships, too damaged to withstand the storm, were scuttled or sank. The exhausted British crews fought for days to save their own ships and the few prizes they could manage. When the news of Trafalgar reached Britain, the initial reaction was one of profound grief for the loss of Nelson. The joy of the victory was overshadowed by the death of their beloved national hero. Nelson was given a state funeral of unparalleled grandeur, a testament to the nation's gratitude. The strategic consequences of the battle were immense and long-lasting. Trafalgar permanently shattered Napoleon's dream of invading Britain. He was forced to turn his attention away from the Channel and towards his continental enemies, leading to his campaign against Austria and Russia. The battle secured Britain's control of the seas, a dominance that would last for more than a century. This naval supremacy was the shield behind which the British Empire would expand and flourish throughout the 19th century. It allowed Britain to trade freely across the globe, fueling the Industrial Revolution, while the Napoleonic Wars would continue to rage on land for another decade. Britain itself was safe from an invasion. Wooden walls of the Royal Navy had proven to be the nation's ultimate defense. The victory at Trafalgar was a testament to bold leadership, innovative tactics, and the skill of ordinary sailors. It was a battle won not just by ships and cannons, but by the indomitable spirit of a commander and his men. The echo of Nelson's signal continues to resonate, a timeless call to duty and sacrifice. The names of the ships, Victory, Royal Sovereign, Téméraire, became legendary. Their story, and the story of the battle, became a cornerstone of Britain's national identity. It was a victory that came at a great cost, but one that ultimately saved a nation. The Battle of Trafalgar was more than a naval engagement. It was a defining moment in world history. It ensured that the fate of Europe would not be decided by one man's ambition alone. Courage displayed on that autumn day in 1805 secured a future that might otherwise have been lost.